Stallone, Global Dominion.
Stallone, Global Dominion.
Stallone, Global Dominion. Stallone, Global Dominion.
Okay, we're good. We're recording. So
All right.
good day, good evening, and good afternoon to all our audience here in Global Dominion Financing page. We're up for a new discussion this week, and we're particularly discussing something extremely special tonight because it involves a lot of people in the Philippines. So two of the industries in the Philippines, I think well, that's at the top of the list when we talk about resiliency, will be BPO and fintech. So amidst pandemic, they have continuously showed performance. And to have a chat about that today is we have a seasoned and experienced executive in both fields, BPO and fintech industries. Joining us all the way across the globe, Giacomo Puccini. We call him Gio. Gio, how are you today?
Good. I
Is everything
have
good?
at first, yeah. So when I was younger, I was always really, really strict about using my full name, Giacomo or Giacomo. But as I was in the Philippines, it was a little bit of a struggle for some of the Filipinos. So I was like, well, what's easier? And they're like, Gio. So I'm like, let's do it. And I went with it.
Okay, but I'll call you however you want me to call you. So
Yeah,
Giacomo, how
Gio's
do you
fine,
say it? How do you
Giacomo.
say it?
With the Italian
Yeah,
twang
let's
on it,
try
you'd say
that.
Giacomo. Otherwise, Giacomo.
Giacomo. Okay, I'm gonna
But
try that.
most
Let's
people
see.
say Giacomo.
Okay, that's fun. I'm
But
gonna try
Gio's fine.
Giacomo. Okay, let me try that. Okay, I've just for the information of our audience. Thanks for joining us today, Giacomo. And for the information of our audience, Giacomo is a seasoned executive. He spent 10 years building and establishing and leading some of the best call centers in the Philippines. And I've met him as well in a few of the fintech companies in the country. So you would probably be one of the most well versed in when it comes to BPO, business process outsourcing, and fintech. I'd like to start with a question about how you started your journey with the BPO and fintech industries here in the country. Let's start with that. I mean, I'm curious as to how that actually happened.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, that pretty much happened a while ago. I was there for 10 years. I ended up wanting to go there for a short stint and became a lot longer. So I've been passionate about financial industry for as long as I can remember. I started trading the stock markets at the age of 12. Then at 16, I worked as a teller for a major bank. And while I was in college, I actually started working for a brokerage firm. And well, moving to fintech was a natural transition as it's pretty much the future of financial industry, right? So prior to going to the Philippines, I was working with several captive sites in the U.S. to elaborate for like listeners who are going to be listening to this recording. So a captive site is also known as an in-house site, and it's
Mhm.
a contact center location that is fully owned and operated by the company who is servicing the work. So like the BPO side of things is pretty much the business process. It stands for business process outsourcing, and they are the companies that are hired to handle some business processes, which allow the company to focus on their core skills, which will provide a better experience for the clients and allow for operational efficiency. So my first exposure to BPOs was when I joined a Philippine BPO who was grooming one of the prior companies that I had worked for. So I was
Mhm.
previously one of the employees there, and they were grooming them as a client. And so they're like, hey, this is a perfect match.
Mhm.
So they leveraged my experience with their company as a key selling point. And during my 10 years while I was in the Philippines, I was able to lead many teams and see how passionate Filipinos are in supporting customers' needs. Filipinos are really great to work with, and during my time there in the Philippines, I was able to make some excellent friends. Actually, one of them, which was you, while we were there, we made friends. So that was one of my good experiences as well.
Well, was that planned? Was that designed that you stayed here for 10 years?
Yeah.
Because you mentioned earlier, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no. So yeah, originally I went there on vacation. So it was supposed to be a 3 month travel someplace in Asia with a good buddy of mine, check it out. And I always wanted to have international experience. I feel it's a very
Mm.
critical part of somebody's life to be able to learn about different cultures, how different people work, because every country and every culture is different. So if I'm going to say, and that's I was born and raised in the U.S., right? But Americans lots of times will have a bad stigma when they travel because they'll be like, "I'm American. You got to learn English. Why are you not speaking
Mhm.
English to me?" And they'll be loud and very direct and very like, "Why is this not cooked perfectly?" And they'll give it back, and they expect things to be done how they want. Because in the U.S., it's always the customers. For the most part, the customer's right. They get what they want. If they're not happy with it, they give it back, and they are very vocal about things, which is one of the, you know, it can be a strength, but also can be a challenge when they travel abroad. So that was one thing traveling. It helped me understand and adjust and make sure that I have a more neutral global perspective on how people are and how people work, and to make sure that I can synergize better with different cultures. I'm half Italian, half Colombian, and I was very much
Wow.
raised with the Latino culture, and I do speak Spanish fluently. So with that, I do kind of have a better understanding of the Latin culture and the Spanish culture, but Asian culture I didn't have at all, and it is a very different culture. So
Is
going
was
to
it?
someplace in Asia, I wanted to feel that.
How different was it? I see that it's some sort of a personal test. What you
Yeah.
did right there. Was it your first time working internationally? I mean, outside of the U.S. Was that the first
Um, So when I was, as soon as I graduated high school, my
time?
mom, so my parents were both born in Venezuela,
Okay.
which is struggling a lot right now. But my mom felt it would be a good opportunity for me to go there. So when I was freshly graduated from high school, she sent me to Venezuela for six
Okay.
months to live with some family, understand the culture a little bit better. So that was really my first experience of living abroad and understanding a different culture. And then I lived a couple years in the Dominican Republic, but never in Asia. I had lived in other countries for periods of
Okay.
time.
I see, but you lived what you tried to do what different people say. Maybe a little bit easier for you to adjust then. But you're
That's
telling me
true.
it's a lot different. That's what you said. How different was the Asian culture versus some of the
Yeah.
other cultures you had immersed with before?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It is different. Well, and I guess Filipinos are kind of an anomaly. I living there for so long, I always said they're more like the Latinos of Asia, and it's because they do have a lot of Latino roots, but they're a lot more family oriented, and they're very close knit. They're a very close knit culture. Where some other cultures that are Asian are more known for being like, you go on your own, you do your own things, you got to find your own way, and you got to be aggressive and very opportunistic. Filipinos are not that way as much. They're more about being close to their family, being friendly and loving. They're hardworking and everything, but it's more about doing it in a caring way.
I don't know if you're just saying that, but okay.
No,
Getting
that's
old.
that's my personal take on it,
All right.
and that's probably why that is a very strong positive point, and it's one of the reasons why Philippines is so strong on outsourcing, especially with service-based roles, because you can call somebody in the Philippines or deal with a customer service agent in the Philippines, and you can just berate them. You can go up, you can yell at them. I'm not saying that you should, it's not cool, but we do deal with a lot of these situations overseeing call centers where one of the team members will just have a terrible experience with a client, and they hold strong. Like I mean, I just can't believe it. They'll take all that and they'll be like, okay, sir, yeah, let me go ahead and help, no problem. And they'll just keep getting it, getting it, getting it, getting it. When the call and they're you don't feel at all they're falling apart. When the call ends, they hang up, and sometimes they'll have a little bit of a breakdown, but they'll take it, and they'll be very, very, very professional about it. Um, Other countries, I mean, I think there's a lot of YouTube videos you can even see where it'll be customer service people from other countries, and they'll be like, "You can't talk to me like that. What do you think you're doing? I'm not that kind of person." And they'll hang up the phone on them, or sometimes argue back with them. Filipinos culturally, I haven't seen that as it's rare for me to see Filipino somebody in a support role to fight back or argue with the customer. They'll usually take it, and if it needs to be escalated, then a leader will jump in and
Would
handle the
you
call.
would you then consider it as one of the strengths of the Filipinos in the process outsourcing business?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, so many times there are a lot of strengths with it, and strengths can be strengths and weaknesses depending how you look at it, of course. But so when I look at how the BPO and fintech expansion in the Philippines is, it reminds me a lot of like the transition of manufacturing to China. So when I was a kid, the stigma was always like, oh, if it's made in China, that's cheap. It's an inferior product. You shouldn't
True.
buy it unless you just want, you buy it, it's going to last for a day or two and it's garbage. That was what you thought. You saw a sticker made in China, you're like, I don't want that. Now, over the years, China's invested heavily into improving its processes, its quality, and technology. And this has put China to pretty much, I'm pretty certain they're the number one or the manufacturing hub of the world. Like every cell phone, every bag, like most everything is made there especially when it comes to high volume. And these days, everything's produced in volume so they can get the price down. And right now, I feel the Philippines, and not just now, but over the last 10, 15, 20 years, the Philippines has been undergoing a very similar evolution transition, but more instead of manufacturing and industry, it's based off service, which is very cool. And over the last 10 years, while I was in the Philippines, I saw during that period of time, Philippines became the number one spot for outsourcing globally. They're number one. And then also, while I was there, when I first arrived there was pretty much zero fintech business or even
Correct.
startups. It was minimal or nothing. I have several friends that set up hackathons and other things there in the Philippines, and I've known them for years, and it was nothing. Like I'd go to things and it was one or two, three people. Now you go there, it's like the biggest conference room that you can find in the country, and it's full. The seats are full. So it's become Philippines has become one of the leading fintech or startup uh, locations in Asia, and that's just over the last 10 years. So they can really do what China's done for manufacturing for service in Asia, which oversees the entire world. And I think that's kind of where Philippines is heading.
Agreed, agreed. And the Philippines isn't even the first to do outsourcing when it comes to services. We know there's
Right.
someone else who have done this
Hmm.
initially, and the Philippines, I would say, kind of took over that and have
Hmm.
seen growth from there on. But aside from you were mentioning about care earlier, but aside from that, what do you think makes Filipinos ahead when it comes to this game, or when it comes
Okay.
to this field? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess a big part of it. So when people initially look at Philippines on like, why am I gonna move my company's presence on support roles from wherever it might be to the Philippines? They initially will look at it like, how can I save money? How can I reduce my operational costs?
Yeah.
And because that's what companies need to do when they're
Right.
competing on a global scale, they're not just competing against people in the same city or the same town or the same state or same country. They're doing it on a global scale. So they're looking at it, how can I save money? So I'm from the US, like you mentioned earlier. And right now, the current national minimum wage is moving up to
Mhm.
$15 an hour. Although bigger cities are struggling to hire people for less than $20 an hour, while in other parts of the world, such as the Philippines, the minimum wage is closer to like $2 per hour. That's a pretty big gap. And then if you're working with like an outsourcing partner or outsourcing company, you're typically as a company going to be spending between 10 to $15 per hour, and that is closer to the minimum wage in the U.S. But that's not just for salary. The 10 to $15 per hour includes office space, equipment, operational costs, and management, IT support. All the services that a company needs to pay to manage its business is all rolled in. So when they look at it, it saves a lot of money. And of course, there are different levels of skill when it comes to the
Mhm.
Philippine teams handling either service, back office, or sales, which is why it's really important for anybody who's looking at outsourcing or working with somebody in the Philippines to do research and choose a partner who's going to be the correct match for the needs that they have. Because there's a lot of different groups you can look at. I've worked closely with teams from the Philippines, and it's really common to be doing a call listening, and you can close your eyes and listen to it, and you're like, gosh, this is this has got to be somebody, a native English speaker from the U.S. That's what you hear, and then you find out this person was born and raised in the Philippines, never left the Philippines, but their English is perfect. And you can find that a lot, which is something you can't really find anywhere else in the US or anywhere else in the world, or it's not as common unless they've traveled a lot or such. And Philippine teams are regular exceeding performance targets, and they get quite a lot of positive feedback from clients just because of that natural service mentality of Filipinos. And part of this is really derived from what I was mentioning earlier, the Filipino culture of being a tight knit group, because they really like to please. The family units are very, very close in the Philippines. This is why working with Filipinos can be pleasant. One thing though, you got to be very, very clear with what your expectations are, the time frames, and then provide sufficient training. And with that, you'll be able to build a team, and you'll have a team that's loyal and dedicated to a company's success. I've seen people, some of the groups that I've worked with had been in the Philippines for 10, 15 years, and you'll see people that still work with that same company from day one. From the first day they open their doors, they're still working with that company. Or it's their first job out of college and they're still with that company. They're not, even if they can see there's a job that pays 5-10% more across the street, they're not jumping and saying, "Hey, I can make a little extra money." They're very loyal people, Filipinos.
Wow. Okay. That's extremely great to hear. I hope all the
It's
traits
only the truth.
yeah, I hope all the traits are still with us. So it's basically service and beyond. That's how I see it. So it's
Yeah,
more
I
than the
like that.
previous
Service and
discovery.
beyond.
Service and beyond. But let's talk about one last thing. Of course, we talked about the strengths. Let's go ahead and discuss the weaknesses instead, or this time, because we've seen how resilient these industries are, but it's only a matter of time that maybe another country or another nation also takes a look into this opportunity. And so if we want the Philippines to stay ahead of the game, they would also have to cover the bases and see how the weaknesses are working around, or maybe how the gaps can
Hmm.
actually be covered. So let's talk about that. What do you think are the things that can still be improved by both the fintech industry, or those that are employed within both industries, fintech and the BPO here in the country?
Okay. Well, yeah. So this kind of brings me back to the same thing where I was saying it's a double-edged sword, the
Mm-hmm.
service. So, because Filipinos are people that love to please, and that's why communication is something that's very important. You have to be very clear on what your expectations are. But with this trait, you also do find some negative things because of that. The most common ones that I personally seen are like, one is people are a lot of people are non-confrontational. So with that, you'll say, "Did you do that?" or "Do you know what I mean or what I want?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And then later you'll be like, "Did you do it?" "Yeah." And then you're like, "Can you show me?" And they didn't do it. And when you ask, "Why didn't you do it?" They're like, "Oh, I don't know." And when you say, "Can you please, what did I ask you to do?" And they're like, "Oh, I didn't really understand." So instead of
Mm-hmm.
them immediately saying, "Hey, I don't understand what you're saying. Can you repeat it?" They don't want to come off like they're messing something up. So they'll just
Mm-hmm.
be like, "Okay." And then they'll just like not do anything and kind of be like, "Oops, I'm stuck." And they won't come back to you and say, "Hey, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it." And you'll find out later. So that's why communication is really important. And as long as when you strengthen that relationship, especially with the leaders of the company, you say, "Hey, look, anything you want to tell to me, tell me. If you're not happy with me, you think I'm not doing things right, tell me. Call me an idiot, call me a jerk, call me whatever. Let me know, because we can only communicate. It's a two-way street. It's
Right.
not like
Right.
I'm working with you and, oh, I'm your boss. You got to do everything I say. No way. It's like if we're not working together, then it's going to make it hard for everybody. Um, and it depends on the people. So as things have evolved over the years, and you actually see in the Philippines, initially when I was first starting, almost all the leaders in BPOs and a lot of the major companies, startups and such were primarily foreigners. You're and I was and similar to China, when you went to manufacturing, it was all foreigners. Nowadays, it's less and less and less foreigners
Right.
because more and more Filipinos are stepping up to these leader roles, and that's exactly what needed to be done. And it's great to see that. So that's a big thing that's improving, but that's part of the communication, part of that skill of being able. Don't be afraid to
Right.
say no, I don't understand. And then the other part is also So there, a lot of times Filipinos are very humble to a fault. Like I've had to tell people, if you don't apply for this job, I don't know what I'm gonna do, and I have to call them into a coaching session and be like, why are you not applying for this role? You're so qualified. You've been doing this job for 6 years. You know more than anybody else. And they're like, well, maybe there's somebody better qualified than me, or I've been doing it for a long time, but I learn something new every day, and until I feel like I know everything 100%, I don't want to apply for a management role. And it's like
Mm.
nobody knows everything 100%, right? So you got to apply for it, and a lot of times they won't. And when especially since I've built a lot of these call centers from the ground up, there's groups that I've taken where we had zero from day one. We found the location, everything, and within 3, 6 months or a year, we've had several hundred people on the team. So
Mm.
if I don't have people that are ambitious, saying, I want to learn, I want to be a leader, I want to help develop teams and individuals, it makes it hard. So that's where it's been a challenge at times, is finding those people that are like, I want to be promoted. I want to head a
Right,
team of
right.
20, 50, 100, 200, 300 people. So that's been a little bit of a challenge that we've had. Just that they're so humble and they don't want to offend anybody else. And then the last point, or the third point of what is a weakness that I've seen, is sometimes sales teams, because they're so positive and so nice. When we try to do sales accounts, sometimes they struggle because the customer will be, I'm not interested early on. That's how it
Right.
is with most sales accounts. Nobody's like, oh, you're calling me about sales. I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Spend 30 minutes of my time. Nobody's like that. And that's why you have to know how to push a little bit more, or ask more questions, find out what their real need is.
Right.
Because sometimes they really, really need it. People don't want to be interrupted when they're in the middle of it. And when a customer, lots of times, will tell a Filipino, especially a newer Filipino sales rep, that, hey, I'm not interested, or I don't want this, then many times they'll be, oh, okay, I'm sorry, and they'll hang up right away. And so we have to
Right.
do a little bit more training when it comes with Filipino sales teams to say, hey, I'm not interested, or no, I don't want it, is not always no. Push a little bit more, ask more questions,
And that's
talk to
expected.
them.
No is
Right.
expected, right?
Exactly. So those are the main points there when it comes to working with individuals there. But I've worked with some sales teams there in the Philippines as well who are exceptional. Like they'll outsell teams in the U.S. That's where communication and training comes into place, like we talked about before, because then they can exceed. And then when it's not about the people, but about people, companies outsourcing to the Philippines, one of the major challenge that a lot of them find will be the minimum headcount requirements. Because lots of
Mhm.
times when they're looking at partnering with a company there, or working with someone there, they'll sometimes require minimum 100 people, or
Right.
minimum 200, 250 people. So some smaller companies that say, hey, I have 10 salespeople that I'm interested having them work with somebody in the Philippines, and it's like, oh, I'm requiring 100 or 250. They're like, wow, I'm not even close to that. But I want
Mm.
to save money. So more and more companies are accepting lower headcounts, and there are some people who specialize in it, but you do have to be careful because sometimes they're not as good. So those are the main difficulties when doing startups or fintech or outsourcing to the Philippines, that I've personally dealt with a challenge on the Philippines. But back to what I said before, communication, setting the clear expectations, and letting them know you really do care about them as individuals and you want
Mhm.
their success, then you'll have a winning team.
I can almost feel the 10 years now. The 10 years of experience. I feel like it's been a heck of a ride for you. I mean,
Yeah.
it definitely took a lot of training and education when it comes to not just communications. It's mainly, it could be an outlook or maybe a perception. I don't know. It's a culture and an environment. And a lot has to change. I can actually put together all the three that you mentioned. It's more like for me, it's assertiveness. When it's not clear to you, when you need the help, and you feel like you deserve to be promoted, you tell the people, right? It's more like that. You just want to be clear, you want to be assertive, and I can see how and why that is a challenge with some of the Filipinos working in the BPO and in the fintech industries. Yeah, I think I've got everything I need, and I want to thank you for all the time and all the inputs you've shared for the BPO and fintech. I hope our audience will also like this. Some of them are working in the BPO and the fintech field. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or maybe if you have a fearless forecast about the BPO and the fintech industries in the Philippines, how it's going to go over the next years, um, because there's a lot of what do you call this? There's a lot of um, guesswork
Transitioning.
done. Yeah, transitioning
Yeah.
as well, all through because the pandemic,
Yeah.
COVID-19. I've seen it working for both industries
Hmm.
during last minute, but I'm not sure how it's gonna go when digitalization moves forward and moves further. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Maybe a lot of these things can get in the way of the expansion of the BPO and fintech industry. What do you say about
Well,
that?
yeah, I completely agree with you on kind of how you hit to, what you're mentioning on there. And the whole time I was there, I was saying the future of call centers is really going to be remove the the entry level work.
Hmm.
They're going to try to transition a lot of that out because as chat bots get a lot more efficient,
Right.
um, the responders, and there's a lot of these things we implemented while we were in the Philippines and in different companies. We were able to reduce email volume or call volume by helping people get the answers themselves, either on the website or through the voice responses. We can set things in place that make it much easier for the customers. And customers, there's some customers that just want to talk to a human being, but there's a lot of them that just say, I just want the answer quickly and effectively. If it's talking to a human, if it's talking to a robot, I don't care. I just want to get a resolution quickly and move on with my life. So I think a lot of the easy answers, the systems will get more and more effective at resolving that. But there will always be a need for some of the more complex or legal or compliance type matters that do require human involvement or a pair of eyes just to double check things. So that will always be a need. And that's where, as long as the Philippines continues to grow and evolve, they're
Hmm.
going to become more and more of the. So China can handle manufacturing,
Right.
Philippines will handle all the service stuff. Hey, you need people to deal with things, we'll do it for you. And as the pandemic made a huge shift, because I was always telling people, hey, long term, people should
Right.
be able to work from home. Why do we need these 10,000 people seat call centers
I remember
when
that. Yeah.
yeah, when we can have people work from home? One of the struggles is at technology before it wasn't as good. It keeps getting better and better and better. But when it gets to the point that people can have really high upload and download speeds from their home and solid internet connections and good video quality and good voice quality, then the big centers won't be as necessary. So that'll be part of it, more remote working. And then part of it will be automation. So remote working, automation will become more and more of a trend. There will always be the traditional way of how we do things right now. There has to be, because if somebody's really, really new to call centers, it's much easier when they have somebody right there next to them. Once somebody's a little bit more tenured, they've done it 2, 3 years, they can work anywhere. They don't really need to work at an office any longer
Right.
because they know the expectations. But for the first 6 months of any new employee in any company, that's usually they're figuring things out. And once they know how to do it at one call center, it's much easier to do it at a different call center or fintech as well. So I think those are kind of the trends that we're going to see will come to stay. Some of the automation, some of the remote working, and we'll see that grow on a bigger scale, and some of that traditional style of working from an office and having the whole setup there will get smaller and smaller.
Right. So it's remote working and anticipating the digitalization to take over
Right.
as well. So the adjustment has or the transition has to happen as well. So
Hmm.
service has to be involved in the transition if we want to keep things in the same pace or same way, I'd say, based on what you
Hmm.
said. So yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the insights, Gio. And how do you say thank you in Italian?
Uh, Thank you.
Yep.
I
Or
don't even know.
you mentioned Spanish,
In
so
Spanish is gracias.
it's gracias. All right,
Yeah.
then I'll talk
It's
to
probably
you
the same.
again next time. Gio, gracias, Giacomo. Is that
Yeah.
the same?
And then yeah. So I work with Alpha Helm. So my consulting company is Alpha Helm. So Giacomo
Okay,
Puccini or Gio with Alpha Helm, and you're more than welcome to find me
sure.
there. ALPHAHELM and alphahelm.com as well.
What does the company do, if I may ask?
So it's business management consulting. So a big
Okay.
part of what we've focused on is implementation And for people who are looking at reducing their operational costs or setting something up, we either help them find a business outsourcing partner. We help them set up the operation and get it going, either with a local or a captive site. Those are the main things that we do, or we just meet with them if they have a turnaround project. Like they're like, hey, I'm working with a company or I'm managing it myself. It's not working as efficiently as we'd like to. Help us out. So we'll just essentially give them another pair of eyes that's gone through it before and try to help work with them to get to optimal performance as quick as possible.
Okay, that's great. That sounds great. So that's where they can find you if they need that
Yeah.
specific help.
Correct.
Okay,
Alphahelm.com.
Alphahelm.com. Thanks again, Gio, and I hope to have a chat with you again next time.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye. Bye for now.
Take care. Bye.
Basta loan, global dominion.
Basta loan, global dominion.
Basta loan, global dominion. Basta loan, global dominion.